It is often so hard to make sense of bad things that happen. Years ago, I read Rabbi Harold Kushner's 1981 best-selling book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. As Kushner states, bad things cannot be prevented, but faith and spirituality and our human connection is present to guide us and support us in our individual and shared healing. Life isn't fair sometimes, or a lot of the time. We all deal with stuff in different ways. There's even a bumper sticker, shit happens. For some, that acceptance may feel somewhat consoling. For others, doing something to try to make sense of it is their consolation and ultimately allows them to move through it. Cancer is one of those bad things. So many of us have been affected by it, whether we ourselves or our family, our friends. In fact, one of my son's dear friends is battling cancer today, age 22, having just had a bone marrow transplant. There could be a podcast series just about cancer. It's so prevalent, and people deal with it in so many different ways. We have featured a local Los Angeles organization on this podcast, Tower Cancer Research Foundation. But this episode explores the cancer journey in a very new way, while raising money for the cancer-related charities that mean most to those impacted by the literal life cycle our guest traveled. Welcome to Small and Gutsy, a podcast featuring interviews with nonprofit and social impact organizations under $10 million. My name is Laura Witkoff, and I'm excited and proud to be your host. My hope is that you love the stories as much as we do, and perhaps you will find needed services, a job, volunteer, invest in, or donate. Feel free to pass along any valuable information you hear today to others, and remember to send me the name of any organization you'd like featured at reachus@theintrinsicgroup.com. David Richman is an entrepreneur, author, public speaker, athlete, philanthropist, but I think he's really a change agent. His ability to transform his own life and motivate others to do the same is exceptional. Our focus is on Cycle of Lives, a nonprofit started in 2013, and its inspiring project that resulted in a recently published book that David authored as a result of his 5,000-mile solo 6-week bike journey across the country, from Los Angeles to Florida to New York, linking 15 people all impacted by cancer in different ways: patients, survivors, loved ones, researchers, or caregivers. His book focuses on the emotional experience of cancer for each of the folks he interviewed. His gift is to give the rest of us not just a bird's eye view into his interviewees' lives impacted by cancer, but lessons in resilience, fortitude, and being present as reflections of our own emotional vulnerability. I am so very excited to introduce David Richman. Hi, David. Welcome to Small and Gutsy, and share with us your passion about this subject, what brought this together, and the journey itself.
Oh, thank you, Laura. Listening to your intro, it really touched a nerve with me because connecting. You talked about that, and that's what my book is all about, is connecting. And as humans, I think we're really only connected by one thing, really, and that is by emotion, right? I like to give an analogy. Put yourself in a small cave with no exit and put a hungry bear at the opening of the cave. Mm-hmm. There's not a human alive that wouldn't be fearful, right? Fear is a emotion. We're all connected by emotion. When I thought about this project, what I wanted to do was I wanted to start, be able to equip people to start hard conversations around trauma, especially around the trauma of cancer. But when I really started to think about it, it was trying to connect people by better understanding the emotions behind the trauma, because that's how we're all connected. The emotional side of trauma is not easily discussed. It's not easily processed, let alone discussed. And that was the start of the project.
It's a great commentary on what binds us together, as you pointed out, and really the thread that carried you through to each of the individuals you interviewed. Because even the researchers or the practitioners, there's an emotional component to the journey of the field of studying and working with cancer and cancer patients throughout anyway. And so to connect that is really, I think, inspiring for so many people.
It is, Laura. And, the last year has forced us to realize the trauma that caregivers go through, right? They could excuse themselves from the room a lot easier a year ago than they can today and over the last year, right?
Yeah.
And imagine, I saw an article the other day that said nearly a third of all healthcare workers are thinking about changing professions because it's so
It's been
hard.
devastating.
In fact, one of the very first reviews that I got, Laura, was so touching to me because it was a critical care nurse in San Diego, I believe, and she wrote me a note and she said, "Hey, I just read your book. It touched me in such a way, it's going to make me a better nurse. I've been a nurse for 15 years. She goes, but I thought I knew what my patients were going through. I didn't know.
Wow.
And your book's going to make me a better nurse. And I went, wow, that is incredible.
Totally hits you, right? Which is really the point of this whole project, is how you could really bring people together around a subject that is so very challenging for all of us, I would say. Most of us want to avoid it. And we certainly have had our issues around this pandemic, how it's affected people with chronic disease or illness. And then on top of that, really whether, most of us shy away from this and don't want to talk about it. But the beauty is that talking about it creates connection and healing. And I think that's a big part of what you've discovered.
It really is. And isolation is, when it comes to any kind of trauma, isolation is a very big issue because not only do we have to deal with people that can't deal with us, but we also tend to isolate ourselves. We tend to hide. I'll tell you a super quick story. When I was, it's going back quite a ways, but I was managing an office of about 100 people during the financial crisis. And unfortunately, one of the advisors, very young guy, unbelievably likable, wife, young kids, something just happened to him and he couldn't handle it anymore and he jumped off the building. And it was absolutely tragic, right? And I walked, I flew back, I was in New York, I flew back to California, and I walked around all the offices because a grief counselor was coming, but they hadn't got there yet. And Laura, there wasn't one single office that didn't have, and these were people that I knew from barbecues and weddings and funerals but I didn't know any of them had a story about suicide. And when I walked around to talk to them and they closed the door, everybody had a story. Every single person. It was absolutely traumatic. And I think that when it comes to those emotional things, the trauma things, we're so used to isolating ourselves and we're so used to burying it and not dealing with it and pushing it aside and letting it create a pile in the corner that we don't ever have to take a look at or deal with because it's in the corner. We're never going to bump into it. And you realize, man, if we can just figure out a way to talk about it, we can be safe to talk about it. If we give it attention, if we allow other people to give it attention, maybe we can learn from it. I mean, what your son's friend is going through, isolation has to be a part of it. He has to think like nobody gets me.
Right. That, and also physically, he has to be to a certain extent in order to heal. So there's this combination of things. And yet with our virtual world and digital ability, you don't have to be completely isolated. I want to make a comment, and then I want to kind of go back to the sort of beginnings of how this started for you. The story you share is so important for so many reasons. And I think it reflects a bit of Brene Brown's work on when we process and when we're truly vulnerable, it's really when growth and healing happens. And it's really what you're talking about is we shut the door of the office thinking, I don't want to deal with this because it's going to bring up my own stuff. And yet you realize that other people who seem maybe perfect on the outside really have that bit of vulnerability that they're afraid to share too.
I'm totally with you that the only way from growth and transformation is a place of safety, a place of contemplation, a place of being vulnerable, allowing yourself to be weak, showing weakness, being okay to be strong, right? It's being safe and vulnerable and taking a minute to get centered and heart-centered and grounded, and then take a deep breath and hopefully come out on the other side. And most of the time, we kind of set it in the corner and we don't deal with it.
And it comes back in various ways when we don't. And when we least expect it, we'll have a reaction to something that we didn't plan. And so that's such an important piece. So take me back a little bit to your own connection to the topic of cancer, how this organization, Cycle of Lives, started, because it started before the project, before the book. And sort of lead me through that piece, if you can.
I was going through a tough time in my life, a bad relationship that needed to end in a divorce. It was very unhealthy for me, and I had young kids. My twins were 4, almost going on 5
Wow.
at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to get them out of that situation. I was overweight. I was a smoker.
Wow. To
Yeah.
look at you now and know that you're an athlete, you would never think that.
I tell people I've done, like 15, 20 Ironmans, and I've run 100 miles. And
so great.
And they go, you used to smoke? So I was in a really bad place in my life. And at the same time, as bad as my life was nowhere near what my sister was going through. She called me up and she told me she had terminal brain cancer. So sad, right? Husband, young kids, a circle of friends, a vibrant job, she's just living her life and being wonderful, and it was going to be stripped away. Through that process, her and I were able to talk. We talked about a lot. We kind of came to terms with the whole thing. I mean, as much as one can come to terms with the fact that you're going to die and everybody else is going to live.
Yeah.
She had this thing where she wanted to do this relay for life, where she sat on the track and she said, the last thing I want to do is I want to be there to watch all the people that are supporting me for 24 hours, right? She wants to be there for the whole 24 hours. And by that time she had been dealing with this for a couple of years. By that time I had become a little bit healthier and started doing events and stuff. And I said, well, if you're going to be there for the whole 24 hours, I'll run the whole 24 hours.
Wow.
So I'll be on the track running for the whole 24 hours. Sadly, she died like 2 days before the event. So she didn't get to go to that, but her team did, and they still went, and I went as well. And I was there the whole 24 hours on the track.
Wow.
My kids by that time were almost 9. And they were out there for the whole 24 hours. It was really sweet. I realized, Lauren, that people, they are good about talking about tasks. How do I see the doctor?
Yeah.
How do I navigate work? Right? How do I eat healthier? How do we raise money? How do we? Right? But they weren't real good about talking about the emotions. As I was walking around that track, sometimes running, sometimes walking, I was sometimes like in my own head, and sometimes I was out there, but I wasn't talking to other people about the actual trauma of it, the emotional issues. Like, why is that so difficult for us to do, to talk about the emotional side of our trauma? And that's what started. So every year after she passed, her name was June, I did a For June in June event. Yeah, where I did like an endurance event, and I raised money and for the cancer center that took care of her, and then other areas. And I thought to myself, this is a recurring theme. It's not a one and done thing.
Right.
Everybody has a difficulty talking about trauma. And so I thought to myself, how can I have something to give back? How can I do something that will maybe make an impact on that ridiculously huge topic of how do we connect through our emotions, through stories, in a way that will make it safe, that we can explore our emotions, we can talk about our trauma, and then we can move on and transform and take control of our future, putting that into perspective. And that's what I wanted to do.
Beautiful. So first, let me tell you how sorry I am for your loss of June. Tough. And also the way that she died 2 days before, and that you carried forward, which I think is quite beautiful, frankly. And must have been very challenging, but kept you focused, would have been my guess. And what you're suggesting, and I absolutely believe it, is we leave out the other key piece of moving through grief, which is actually experience the sadness and being vulnerable. And it isn't linear sometimes. Sometimes we go there for a period of time, leave, and come back. And I think that, again, bringing it to light and awareness, the importance of being able to do that, along with the tasks that we have to do, right, in order to manage whatever situation we're in, is significant. It guides us to a healthier place so that we can function better, frankly, because without that, I think many of us get stuck, because I think we're so afraid of the emotions, as you pointed out, and afraid of the sadness. So I'm sorry this happened, and yet I'm grateful to you for not only doing an event, but recognizing that it's not a single event. Raising money is so important, and we all understand that, but it is really the concept of how do you bring this into people's lives in a way that transforms them when they're dealing with trauma.
And, the raising money part is fun and it's nice, right? But there's always going to be somebody that raises more money and does.
Yeah.
It's the adoption rate. It's the buying into. It's the change that you make. And every once in a while, I get bummed out because it's not touching enough people.
Mm-hmm.
And then 5 minutes later, I'll get an email or a review or something where somebody goes, oh my God, that was incredible, or it made me really think about something, or this really touched me. Oh my God. I have a friend who texted me. She texted me and she goes, I hate you right now. I am not a crier. I am not a crier, and I am crying.
Mm-hmm.
It came in at like 9:30 at night, right? And I just out of the blue. She goes, I hate you because I'm not a crier, and your book is making me cry. It wasn't like a bad cry. And a lot of the stories do have a grief component. It's kind of tragic side of them, but they're all inspiring. They're all hopeful. They're all very, very positive examples of how we can see what people are going through so that maybe we can adapt to the way that we think about ourselves or what other people are going through. So there's a positive that you can take from each story, even if it happens to be a little bit negative.
So I want to ask a bit about how you prepared mentally for this, how you connected with the 15 folks in the book. So let's start there, because that's probably a big topic.
Yeah.
And if there's any particular story, I'm sure they're all incredibly meaningful, but anyone that sort of stands out that you want to highlight. So talk about your preparation.
I said, if we could, let's try to get all different perspectives. So I want young, old, and in between.
Perfect.
I want one and done with cancer, or it was a lifetime's battle with, or a lifetime's focus for a caregiver or whatever. I wanted a depth of experience. I wanted different ages. I wanted the severity of the cancer. Was it terminal? Did somebody die? Was it just the fear of cancer? Also, a range of emotion. Because what you might think is something that's tragic, somebody else might think, that's not so bad because this over here is bad. There's one story, if we get into it, I'll tell you. Somebody had a joyful response to hearing that they had cancer.
Wow, I'd love to hear that story. Yeah.
What I wanted was all the different ranges of what would make us somehow connect with people. And then I asked friends, I asked my wife, people that worked in the medical industry. I cold called cancer centers all around the country saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. Do you have anybody that's interesting? Pretty much everybody's interesting, but I really needed to fill the gaps, those spokes.
You were very specific to cover that, which makes sense because it was. How did you settle on 15? Was 15 a particular number you thought of, or how did that come about?
That's a good question. I've never really thought about it other than it almost covered every single perspective. I'm missing a couple. I have young adult cancer and I'm missing childhood cancer. I had a couple of people that were a part of it, but we couldn't get to the end. They just couldn't go there. And,
okay.
But I think I covered almost every kind of like angle of looking at this so that, and I wanted to write it as short stories, right? So that somebody could pick it up and they could read a 20-page story and go, that touched me or it didn't touch me, and then move on to the next one. You don't have to wait till it makes sense. Like, because I'm so close to him, I personally was touched by all the stories. And I think a lot of people are, but some people, and everybody likes one story more than the others, or a couple of stories more than the others. But that's what I wanted. I wanted you as a professional and a caregiver and somebody that's focused on these things to get something out of it. And I wanted the other person who just didn't know what to say to their friend when they heard their friend had cancer to get something out of it.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Right?
Yeah, really beautiful.
Yeah.
And when you approached folks, did they generally feel good about this project? Were they a little bit, tell me about that piece of it as you started to interview folks.
They wanted to talk about it maybe because there was some kind of connection, maybe somebody they knew had asked them to do it or whatever, but nobody really thought that their story was that spectacular. But when you get into it, you realize, oh my God, they're amazing. The 15 stories that made it are literally amazing.
Wow.
Every once in a while, though, I was able to talk to somebody who hadn't thought about it ever.
Interesting.
Talking to somebody, had some hesitation, and who we really had to work really hard to get down into the heart of the story. That's where I think the beauty of this book lies, is in getting into people's heads. I'll tell you a super quick story of one of the book participants. So I had a doctor I had a medical professional, but I didn't have an oncologist, and I wanted an oncologist. And we happened to find one. When I first started talking to her, I said, "Hey, doc, you got to do me a favor. I got to ask you stuff that you don't talk to anybody about." She goes, "Yeah, that's fine." I go, No. I mean, like, maybe even stuff like you don't talk to your husband about." She goes, "Oh, well, I don't talk to my husband about, this kind of stuff. We don't really get into the deep emotional stuff around my work." And I go, "Well, then we got to talk about things that you don't talk to your closest friends about." And she goes, "Yeah, I don't really talk to my friends about this stuff. We go on hikes, we go to museums, we do whatever." And I said, "Well, certainly peers, when you're, at the end of the day and you're in a room with a couple of doctors." She goes, "Are you kidding me?" She goes, "I can't be weak in front of other doctors." And I go, "Wow. So you've never talked about this stuff?" And she goes, "No."
Wow.
And I said, "Well, let's see what we find out." And what I wanted to do with her story, and it's an amazing story, and I hope people will get the book. If nothing it will teach you how to be a better patient. Is imagine for 40 years having become an expert in your field, having grown as a person, having a life, having raised a family, and having the perspective of how wonderful life can be, even if it's difficult, but how wonderful it could be. And now her sense of urgency to have women, mostly women, because she mostly deals in breast cancer, to have them understand what they're going to miss out on possibly if they don't listen to her, if they don't follow the treatment protocols, if they don't do what they need to get better. She walks out of one room where somebody says, "Well, I'll just eat better. I'll get more sleep. I'll come back in 6 months and deal with it." And then she's got to walk to the next room, and a woman with 2 babies on her knees doesn't have a chance to say that because she's going to die. She's like, she wants to go back to that first room and say, shake them and go, "I've been doing this for 40 years. I know what it's like to live a long, healthy, happy life. You have the chance to do that. Just listen to me." But she can't talk like that because she's a doctor. You wouldn't know it. So I think her story is so touching because she allowed us to understand what her motivation is today, why she's a good doctor who cares about people. And sometimes, Laura, maybe when your doctor's not hearing you well enough, maybe they just walked out of a room where they had to tell somebody bad news. Maybe understand that they're a person too. Have the attention span that you need them to at that time. Maybe they're going through their own shit, right? You just don't know.
Yep.
Maybe it can teach us how to be a better patient. Maybe have a little more compassion for the people that are taking care of us. Allow us to be a little bit more vulnerable. Allow us, to take a different perspective into it. And so each one of the stories has kind of that cool little aspect to it.
Incredible that she didn't ever bring these issues to anyone in her life, like any close personal friend where she could process this. I always wonder to myself, when you go and see a physician, and I've had this experience myself, is I'm a giver, it's my natural, and I always want to ask about them. And sometimes they're really boundaried, which I understand because they're this professional. And yet I think I can have a better connection. Not that I need to know deeply about their personal life, but I need to have that to be vulnerable.
When I go in for checkups and I do whatever, I literally make a point ever since talking to her. When the doctor, because everybody right now picture, of course your doctor walks in and goes, "How are you doing today?" Right. It's the first thing they ask, right? I go, "I'll tell you in a second. How are you doing today?"
David, I do the same thing and have been doing it forever. And I agree with you. Ask the question. Even if they give you a boundaried answer is fine, but you're interested. And that to me creates that connection and that shared vulnerability, even if they don't go into detail. And that's all you need. And I agree with you 100%. So you mentioned earlier the story of someone appreciating a diagnosis. And so would you mind taking us there?
It's a tough story. So you asked me how I got people to talk to me. So I had a friend who said, I have some friends that are going through something. I was in Southern California. They're in Chicago. So I reached out and the husband said, my wife's dying of brain cancer. I don't think she has that much time left. We've got kids, 6 of them.
Wow.
And we're, we're dealing with all of that. We're a very close family. I just don't think the project's right. And I said, okay, no problem. No problem at all. 8 months or a year later, I get a call from my friend who said, hey, I went to so-and-so's funeral and I think now the family's ready to talk to you. I think her story is important enough that they want to talk to you. So I was able to talk to her husband many, many, many times. I talked to her mother several times. I talked to a couple of her sisters a few times, and I put together what I hoped is a story that's representative of her amazing, amazing life. So the short version of it is she has lived this beautiful life, has a wonderful, loving relationship. Her and her husband even get through the death of a child. Beautiful, successful marriage, life. Financially, they're well. They're close to their family. I mean, everything is going well for them. But they start fighting, and they go to counseling and they fix it. And then they start fighting. They go to counseling and they fix it. And then they start fighting, and counseling doesn't help. And they fight more and more, and he's becoming more and more detached, and she's becoming a little bit more unreasonable. And they're fighting about the fighting and not about anything. And anyway, long story short, she has lost her mind. She's completely lost her mind. And he knows it. She knows it. But, they can't deal with it that way. And they have this knockdown, drag out scream fest for 12 hours. And at the end of it, she falls down on the heap on her bed and says, "It's not you, it's me. I'm absolutely going crazy. I need to go be seen by professionals. I need to have you check me into a mental institution." After 25 years of marriage, getting through the death of a child, raising kids, the whole thing, and she's got to now admit to the fact that she's going crazy. So they take her to the hospital. She gets checked in, and he goes home. He gets a call at 3:00 in the morning from the lead physician at the mental institution saying, "You need to come down here right now. We did a battery of tests on your wife. Turns out she's got a grapefruit-sized tumor in her brain.
Wow.
We need to operate immediately. She might not make it, but you need to come down here right now." Sorry if I get a little emotional.
No, I'm getting emotional too. It's okay.
So he goes to the place, and he grabs his wife's hand, and he looks at her, and he says, "If you're going to go in for surgery, you might not make it. You got a tumor." And she smiles, and she said, "So it's not me."
I'm tearful. It's like, this is an incredible story, because somewhere she knew her body, whatever part, was not responding like it typically had. And she was desperate and couldn't figure it out. And so that story is absolutely incredible. I can see why she was relieved in a way, because she couldn't fix it. It was something being done to her, and mental illness can be part of that too. But this was really something that was such a sudden shift in their relationship, in her life. No one could understand. She couldn't understand. Her husband couldn't understand. And so in some way, it gave a level of peace.
It's a little tragic because, nobody wants to die. She really didn't want to die. And her kids were all boys. The little girl that they lost at 18 months was her little angel. And then late in life, when she was 49, if you can imagine, she got pregnant again and had a little girl. So her little girl was only 6 or 7 when she passed. But, so obviously unbelievably tragic for her family. But when you say, "Oh, yeah, well, I wanted to cover all emotions, even joy," people are like, "Joy? Who would ever be joyful at getting a diagnosis like that?" And in one sense, of course, there's nothing joyous about it. But you could understand, like you said, the relief. It's not me, it's something else. And imagine how she thought all of that life had been for nothing, because it was all going to be tossed away. And now, the second she heard that, it all had its meaning back.
Right, for sure, 100,000%. And in sharing that story, David, not only do you give the rest of us perspective on maybe not making assumptions about things too, when things start to shift and change, but really to take the space and time to think about it and figure it out. And I think the other piece is, by honoring her in this way through your book, you created a legacy and a longevity in a positive way about their family, her marriage. The children now get to reflect as they age on really who their mother was. And I just commend you for sticking with it, taking the time, and doing this.
There's another little twist to her story. that relates to what we talked about at the very beginning, transformation and being a safe place and kind of cocooning yourself. There's a butterfly story in there that is really kind of amazing. So, but
and are you going to share that, or we should all read the book? We should all read the book.
Sorry, yeah, you should read the book. I can't give away all of it, Laura.
Yeah, of course. So there's another piece of your book that I want to talk about, David. All the proceeds of your book go to cancer organizations that are selected by the people in your book, as well as your own nonprofit. There's a great reason to buy this book and donate and give support. And even on your website, you have all your partner organizations to whom you donate. So I encourage everybody to buy the book. I'm going to. I didn't have a chance before this podcast because we just set this up recently, but that's on my to-do list. I can't wait to read it and to look at all the organizations you're supporting with your nonprofit.
Each person had an affinity for a certain organization. And I said, look, here's the open the book on books. I'm going to open up the book and show you on books. Nobody makes any money on books. I mean, of course, Obama gets a $10 million advance and he deserves it. And Oprah Winfrey likes a book and that book becomes a bestseller and they deserve it. But most books don't make any money. Okay. But they can do okay. If I sell books directly, my publisher wouldn't be so happy, but the publisher I found loves it. Sell all the books you want directly. That way we cut out the middleman, more of the money goes. When a book sells like on Amazon or whatever, which is where most books sell in today's world, the author ends up getting a cut of like $4 or $5 a book. That $4 or $5, 100% of that goes divided up between these organizations. So it's not a lot of money, but we sell a lot of books. It's a lot of money. Anybody could go out and write it. Most people could go out and write it. Look, you wanted to hear a story that's amazing. I'm in the middle of Texas, and it's the longest day of my ride, and I'm alone. I had support from my wife most of the time, some friends some of the time, and I was on my own for some of the time. I'm on a 17-hour day of biking, 156 miles, 17 hours, crazy wind, 5 flats. I'm on the freeway, just getting hit by trucks, and it's the most ridiculous thing ever. I'm so tired, and I get to this hotel nearly 1 a.m, and this girl comes from behind the counter, and she goes, "Oh, David, we're so glad you're here." And I go, "How do you know who I am?" And she said, "Oh, the manager told me you were coming, and we're to give you the room for free. And by the way, my grandfather just died of cancer a couple of weeks ago. I'd like to make a donation." And I went, "Oh my God, that's totally sweet." And I won't tell you the amount, but let's just say the amount was very, very small. The only thing open at that time was a Burger King. I hopped on my bike, I go to the Burger King drive-thru, and I order myself a burger, and I go out to my room, and I get a call from the lady, and she goes, "Hey, I went on your website and I made a donation." And I go, "That's so sweet of you." And she said, "I can't really afford it as a monthly donation. Is that a one-time donation or a monthly donation?" And I went, No, it's a one-time donation. It's very, very sweet of you." And I thought to myself, I'm going to have that gift for the rest of my life because she took the time to give money. That was such an important gesture on her part. It wasn't much money. It wouldn't make any difference in the world. But the fact that she wanted to do something was so touching and it was so awesome. And I felt like, man, that is really cool.
Absolutely.
And so it isn't the gift. It isn't the money. It's the intention. It's the connection. It's the story. It's the gesture. It's those kind of things.
I want to go back to the bike ride a tiny bit because that's an enormous endeavor to go from Southern California to Florida to New York, 5,000 miles.
So I talked on the phone with everybody and I had only met a few of the people in person. So I wanted to connect us. I wanted to connect the stories with the narrative. So my thread of the stories connects the stories. And I had hoped that I would be inspired and be motivated by the people I met along the way. It happened every single day. Just to put it into numbers, I chose the bike because cycle of lives, a life cycle. I just thought that was a good play on words. And then I said, well, if you're going to connect people, what better way to connect them than on your bike, bicycle, cycle of lives? So I said, well, so I drew this zigzaggy map of how could I see the most people along the way. In one case, it was going up to Albuquerque and then down to Austin, Texas, and then back up to Houston, then to Tampa, Florida. So I had to zigzag way doing it, right? That was, 110 to 120 miles a day, sometimes 90, sometimes 150. And on the one thing that I'm going to tell you that is, you're going to say I'm being a whiner, but I'm not. The direction of the wind, what direction does it go in? Whatever direction you're headed. If you're on a cross-country bike ride, people are like, oh, you're going from California to Florida. Good thing, because the wind will be at your back. The wind was at my back one day.
Oh, no. Oh, yeah. So you really had a tougher ride.
Yeah. For cyclists out there, you'll understand when you're in a 20-mile-an-hour headwind in Texas versus a 20-mile-an-hour tailwind in Texas, it's the difference between a 7-hour day and a 14-hour day.
I believe it. Oh my gosh. So you really had to keep these stories and these folks in your head, as well as the people you met along the way.
Yeah, thank you. I feel very lucky that I do have those stories, right? Because they do live with me. I could bore you and your audience all day long with these crazy, tiny little stories that are kind of whatever, insignificant, but they're kind of amazing.
I think that's honestly a second book. And it's behind the scenes of Cycle of Lives, because those little tidbits, and they're not little, they're huge. And the reason they're huge is it reminds all of us that not only is it about the human connection that we've talked about, but it's really the little bit that any of us can do, whether it's a kind word, whether it's a donation, whether it's treating somebody to a dinner or lunch or whatever it is enough. And is significant in and of itself.
Yeah, and I did include some of those stories. There's another one I'll tell you super quick. I had finished a day, and I was tired, and I was cranky. Every day I was tired and cranky right by the end of the night because I had stomach issues, and I was tired, and it was hot. And my wife was, she went down to the lobby to go grab some food, and normally that would be like 10, 15 minutes. And like a half hour later, I'm like, where the heck's my damn food? I'm starving, I'm cranky, and whatever. And she comes up, and I'm not cranky at her, but I'm just cranky. And she goes, oh my God. She goes, I'm sorry it took so long. I was downstairs and I ordered food, and this lady behind me ordered some food, and we just started talking, and I told her why we were here and whatever. And then she said, a few days ago, one of my coworkers, 4-year-old son got diagnosed with cancer. I don't know what the heck to say to her. I don't know what to say to her. I can't wait for your husband's book to come out so I know what to say. And I went, oh my God.
How long did it take you? How long did the actual ride take you?
I did 4,700 miles in 45 days. And I took 3 planned rest days and 1 forced rest day because of a hurricane.
Small and Gutsy is sponsored by the Intrinsic Group, my boutique management consulting firm specializing in guiding organizations to leverage talent, optimize processes, and to ensure the organization's narrative is aligned with their culture. We'd love to invite you to be a sponsor. So if you're interested in sponsoring Small and Gutsy to keep it going, please reach out to me at reachus@theintrinsicgroup.com. As you probably know, at the end of our podcast, we always do a round of quick Gutsy questions, and you are not an exception. We're going to ask these questions, so get ready for them. They're fun. What is at the top of your wish list for Cycle of Lives? And the answer can't be money or funding.
The top of my wish list is that people are advocates for the readership because they believe that it will help people. That's the top of my wish list.
If you were to think of a song that describes Cycle of Lives, what would it be?
I love all kinds of music, and I'm a major music fan, and people would be shocked to hear the kind of music that I like. It's all over the place. The answer to that question is there's a song by the Eagles called Take It Easy. I tried to get the lyrics into my book, but they were too expensive. Because at one point in the book, I was standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona.
I love it. I know the song. Keep going.
And I was complaining to myself, and all of this junk was in my head. And I was going, wait, isn't there a song about standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona? It's about taking it easy. Take it easy, dude. Mm-hmm. So that's what I did. So relating to this book, Take It Easy is the perfect book, is the perfect song.
What makes Cycle of Lives Gutsy? Because it certainly is gutsy as an organization and the project, but talk about the organization in general. What makes it gutsy?
It forces people to do something that they're not comfortable doing. I don't want to give away the ending of the book, but it even if one tiny little thing, it can have a profound change in the way that you interact with people. That I think is gutsy. And it takes a lot of guts to interact. Imagine what it would take for somebody that doesn't want to accept help to now be able to accept help. Or imagine what it's like for somebody to show strength when they feel weakness. All those things are gutsy, man. Those are hard things to do. And so that's where I think it's gutsy, is that I'm attempting to equip people to better deal with these really, really difficult things.
This whole conversation has touched me deeply for a lot of reasons. And I have to share a quick story. A very dear friend of mine is been surviving lung cancer and then had some brain cancer. And we had a falling out much before her diagnosis and really had stopped talking for a period of time. And I heard through the grapevine, and we were living near each other in New England, that she had surgery and had a cancer diagnosis. And I immediately dropped what I was doing, got a bunch of flowers, and went over to her house. And I could start crying just thinking about this. And I thought, I'm not sure she's going to open the door for me because we hadn't been talking. She opened the door, gave her the flowers. We embraced like nothing had happened. And she said to me, you know what? It takes a lot of guts to come over, given what we had, gone through. And she goes, I'm not sure I would have done this for you, but I'm so glad you did it for me.
That's really
But that's
sweet.
what your book is about. You just have to approach and get rid of all the garbage and be able to have a conversation and be able to let it go and be what's really underneath all of whatever the noise is the friendship, is the relationship.
I mean, honestly, giving love, receiving love, right? That's really what humans are all about. That's the only thing that really matters.
And she was vulnerable. I was vulnerable, and we were vulnerable together in that moment. For her to even be able to say that to me was beautiful and very touching, and has been with me ever since.
That is gutsy. I mean, that's gutsy. Like you said, I don't know that I would be able to do that.
And our relationship has gotten deeper since that time, which is wonderful. And she is surviving, and I'm hoping that she continues to survive. She's a powerful force. And so we're all behind her. She's got a big posse behind her. So thank you for letting me share that. So next gutsy question. What is something that outsiders or maybe even a few insiders don't know about Cycle of Lives?
What they don't know about it, well, they would get it from reading the book, but they would have no idea without reading the book that part of the journey is me dealing with the loss of not just my sister. Everybody deals with loss, but it's a loss of the only person that was in my life that knows about me and my childhood and growing up and whatever, right? My father died when I was young. My mom and I haven't talked in decades and decades and decades. Her choice, not mine. And I don't have any childhood friends that are in my life now. Coming to terms with that and realizing that you can't always put all the edges of the puzzle. Sometimes a few pieces, even on the edges, are gone. And that means, that the picture is not going to be ever complete. And I think when June died, I didn't realize it at the time, but part of what died with her was that one person that could understand the early part of my life, and which was her life too, right? So, that's a bummer.
A bummer. And I want to maybe suggest, and it may not fit, that your capacity to put stories together for other people is symbolic of the story of yourself.
Yeah, you're right.
I brought flowers, you bring stories. My last quick gutsy, they're never quick because we always get these great pearls of wisdom in these questions, so thank you for that, is if you could get one celebrity or influencer to endorse or talk about Cycle of Lives, who would it be?
I certainly have gone after a lot of celebrities, a lot. I would say, and I hope this doesn't come off as trite, because it seems like an automatic answer, Oprah Winfrey. I know in my gut, if she read my book, she would be like, everybody needs to read that book. And I know that if she endorsed it, she would say, and people would believe her, you got to read this book because it will help you deal with the difficult things around trauma. That type of an endorsement would help a lot of people. Again, all the money's going away to charity anyway. Who cares? But only because she's got the voice.
You really want a megaphone around this book because it can really help people. And that's been the beginning of this, and toward the end of the podcast is really what you've said, is it really helps people think through, be able to have difficult conversations. And we've been in our own, kind of lovely roller coaster in this conversation of where I've gotten teary, I've gotten goosebumps, I've shared a story. I mean, it really is, it's a journey that we all need to go on, because in this life, none of us are untouched, right? And so, as I said in the beginning, shit happens.
Sure.
And being able to really address it from an emotional as well as tactical way is significantly important to our own well-being. I want to thank you for taking this time, David, with me today. It was an absolute beautiful conversation. I loved it.
Thank you, Laura. I did too. You're wonderful to talk to. I appreciate you sharing stories with me. I'm gonna leave with one thing. Sorry if it's personal to you, but have your son's friend reach out to one of the organizations that we support. Is called Stupid Cancer. I happen to serve on the board as well, but there's no conflict because it's not a paid position. They are the largest organization that caters to the AYA community, adolescent young adult community. And probably isolation is a bigger issue for him because most likely every room he goes into, it's either little kids or old people. It's not people like him. And so that's very isolating. And what Stupid Cancer tries to do is end isolation.
Thank you. That's a great referral. I really appreciate that. I wanted to ask one last question of you, which is, how can people find you? How can people buy the book? What's the best way? Give us all the information.
Well, the best thing to do is to go buy a book on my website if you want, have it signed. If not, buy it on Amazon. And if you do read the book, and if it does touch you, tell people about it, write a review, do whatever. But they can go to my website, which is cycleoflives.org, or they can just look up the book, Cycle of Lives, and jump on Amazon. It'll be there next day.
And I want to donate this podcast to June.
Oh, that's very sweet.
And to the young man, Will, of whom I spoke. And to my dear friend Cha, who is still battling but continues to be in remission, and hopefully, will live a nice long life, as I hope for Will too. We don't talk about this stuff, but this kind of information, because none of us go without having had an experience with cancer or another traumatic issue in our lives where we have to be vulnerable. And again, I cannot thank you enough. This was beyond a pleasure.
Well, thank you. And just to make it, keep it 360, as we said at the beginning, let's stay connected.
Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, give us some stars and write a review on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts, or buy us a coffee. buymeacoffee.com/small and gutsy. I want to thank my partners in this endeavor, my co-producer, sound engineer, and composer, the amazing Pavel Franson, my exceptionally talented graphic designer, Nate Addy, my social work intern extraordinaire, Stephanie Tran. Please check out their bios on the Intrinsic website, and all the folks, friends, and family who have guided and inspired me. Our blog of these small and gutsy nonprofits and social impact organizations can be found in the organizational stories section of the Intrinsic Group website, so that we can continue to link clients, volunteers, future employees, investors, and donors to this small but mighty network. Of course, we can't take responsibility outside of our own vetting of the organizations we interview, so before you sign on to support or work for them, we encourage you to do your own due diligence and research them as well. We just want you to learn about the small and gutsy nonprofit and social impact organizational sector so they can spread their story and their impactful work. From small and gutsy to big with impact, I'm Laura Witkoff, and thanks for listening.